Hello and welcome to the GSMA's AI for Impact webinar series. Thank you for joining us. Before we launch into the session, I would like to begin with thanks and acknowledgement that this initiative has been funded by UK aid from the UK government and is supported by the GSMA and its members, and that the views expressed within this webinar do not necessarily reflect the UK government's official policies. So welcome everyone to the fifth instalment in the GSMA webinar series using mobile big data analytics to combat challenges including COVID-19. These sessions were conceived as a means to support and share knowledge, showcase some of the great work being done in mobile big data analytics, but also to help those that are new to this area to develop a foundation level of understanding in case you may be interested to establish provision of or use of such services in your location. My name is Rob Childs. I'm the Strategic Engagement Lead for the GSMA's AI for Impact initiative, and I will be hosting today's session for you. This edition will primarily focus on the ecosystem stakeholders and their contributions when developing new services enabled by mobile big data analytics. That's as well as providing the opportunity to share real mobile operator experiences from across both developed and low middle income markets. Turning to the agenda, I will provide an overview of the mobile big data stakeholder ecosystem and explain a little bit about the main roles and responsibilities of these stakeholders. That is before welcoming Pascal Chambreuil, who is the co-founder and principal manager of Orange Fluvision Crowd Analytics Solution and head of the Fluvision department, who is joining us from France today to present and share insights on Orange's work across its global footprint. Following that, we will be joined by Abdoul Karim Diawara, who is the Wholesale and Projects Division Director for Orange in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Orange is working with the GSMA and other partners to support the government response to COVID-19. And we will be discussing with him the ongoing work in DRC and some of the lessons learned to date from this and other experiences. Finally, we will wrap up today's session with an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask questions. And to close, we will let you know where you can find additional information on the approaches covered in today's session. For the Q&A, we invite you to submit questions, which you can do throughout the session using the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of the screen. And before launching into the session itself, let me quickly begin with a quick recap of the GSMA's AI for Impact initiative for those of you that may be new to the series. So the GSMA launched the AI for Impact initiative in 2017 with the aim to scale up mobile big data analytics and artificial intelligence for the Sustainable Development Goals. We have an advisory panel of 12 UN agencies and global partners, including the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the World Bank, as well as a task force of 21 mobile operators from around the world. Together at a global level, we're establishing a common framework for implementing mobile big data projects. That is to define the technical, commercial, and ecosystem needs, and critically the privacy and ethical requirements to deliver sustainable products and services. At a local level, we work with operators, governments, and partners to implement projects and cross-sector collaborations to unlock the market opportunities. To support the sharing of the common framework I mentioned there, we have established this webinar series. Today is the fifth edition. If you weren't able to join us for previous editions, I would encourage you to revisit these. Recordings of them are available on the webinar link indicated on the slide. In summary, our first webinar provided an overview of mobile big data analytics, explaining what we mean with mobile big data analytics and AI products and services. In short, that is mobile operators leveraging aggregated, non-identifiable mobile network data and combining this with other third-party data sets, then applying advanced analytics and packaging this into meaningful tools that can ultimately aid government agencies in evaluating, planning, and decision-making. We then moved into 3 deep dive sessions looking at the foundational components based on our experiences as the AI for Impact initiative. The first being on privacy and policy considerations, given that safeguarding privacy and ethics is paramount for mobile big data solutions. This is realized via the principles of transparency and accountability, inclusiveness and fairness, safety, and security. Throughout the pandemic, operators have ensured that assistance provided in response to the COVID-19 crisis is done in accordance with applicable local data privacy laws and are committed to protecting the privacy and rights of individuals. Following that, we next focused on the technical considerations for delivery and adoption, so sharing insights into how operators are capturing billions of data points every day from the operation of vast, complex, and dynamic mobile networks, and showing how the processing, advanced analytics, and packaging of data is executed to deliver meaningful insights. Then, building on that foundation, our sustainability and funding session focused on the investment in innovation and some of the business models required to create mobile big data and AI products and services that, when supported by sustainable sources of funding, solutions can achieve scale to deliver more benefit for more people across more geographies, can encourage exploration of new use cases and new business models. Because they are able to attract long-term investment, this creates incentives to improve and innovate using new techniques, for example, the inclusion of more AI technologies. Sustainable solutions also support long-term change initiatives and help to transform ways of working. And finally, a sustainable approach delivers a larger impact and value over time. As you can see, we've covered a lot of topics and shared a lot of information. And the reality is that each element requires engagement with a broad range of stakeholders. And so to today's theme of the ecosystem, stakeholders and their contributions. We're now 8 months since the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, and COVID-19 continues to challenge citizens, governments, and economies around the world, with many countries now approaching or currently experiencing a second wave of infections. Here, the GSMA's AI for Impact initiative, we continue to explore how insights derived from mobile big data generated by cellular networks can be used across a broad range of use cases. And we've been monitoring and working with operators, governments, and partners to support their response. As mentioned, one element in all these use cases is that multiple stakeholders within the ecosystem have to come together to realize these solutions. Both current and past implementations we've been involved in have shown that when the right stakeholders participate from the outset, the partnerships often achieve accelerated learnings and better outcomes. It should not, however, be underestimated the complexity and time required to bring together the right stakeholders in a geography to realize these solutions. There are a number of potential contributing factors, and the significance they carry, of course, does vary by geography. But examples may include the following. So the level of awareness and preparedness within a country from the perspective of the integration of technical and structural insights. The relevant experience in delivering mobile big data products within the supply side, so within the mobile operator. The experience and implementation and adoption of mobile big data products within the demand side, so often they're on with the government. Of course, that's not discounting the need to ensure compliance with local legal and regulatory conditions, the appropriate application of privacy protections, and giving due consideration to the value in line with sustainability and the funding needs of the project. And I believe Pascal will touch on some more of these elements in his presentation. Therefore, having an understanding of the roles and responsibilities of participants, as well as their respective capabilities and the relevant data assets they bring, can be invaluable. To support this, we've created this high-level overview as a visual representation of the mobile big data analytics ecosystem. And this is looking at developing a mobile operator-supported service in a single country. It illustrates the supply side and the demand side participants and how the development of insights is a process. The blue background marks out the contributions of the demand side stakeholders, typically governments, and the black background, the supply side, so thinking here of the mobile operator. The grey background that wraps around all of these represents the regulatory environment within which these stakeholders all operate. The process, as shown by the arrows across the top of the graphic, is one where a clear need is first identified. Most successfully, this is done in collaboration between both supply side and demand side stakeholders. With this clearly defined need established by the demand side, the mobile operator can begin to use the data and apply their unique knowledge of their networks to create actionable insights that address that need. And finally, but just as critical, is the stage of translating those insights to realize impact, which again requires collaboration and involvement from actors on both sides. The large number of stakeholder groups and the plethora of organizations and individuals that make up these groups can create a complex environment for implementing solutions. Identifying and engaging the relevant stakeholders in each setting is essential to forging effective partnerships. And as mentioned, an element of interdependence occurs between stakeholders, as the concerns of one can be overcome by the work of another. For example, public sector stakeholders could make small changes to their regulatory frameworks that would allow the use of aggregated mobile data indicators while still protecting the personal information of individual mobile users. So let's take a look at who the different stakeholders are in a little more detail. Beginning with the demand-side agencies, or DSAs. These are institutions and organizations that use insights from the analysis of mobile big data for their activities. The government is the primary customer on the demand side. It is important that mobile operators have a direct relationship with the relevant department or departments in the government, because they are the end customer who will make the practical use of the analysis and insights. And it's vital that the mobile operator and the government clearly define the problem, and that both parties understand how mobile big data analytics can contribute solutions to the problem. Demand-side agencies may also include development agencies, NGOs, research institutions, and social impact organizations. As they have a specialist knowledge of the challenges that they are trying to address, demand-side agencies play an important role in articulating the problem statement, which enables the identification of relevant indicators and the solutions to address it. It's also worth noting that demand-side agencies can also be third-party data providers, thereby also potentially positioning them as supply-side agencies in the system of stakeholders. Moving on to the supply-side participants. The most common supply-side stakeholders in mobile big data analytics are mobile network operators and third-party data providers. The mobile operator can play multiple roles in the ecosystem. Collectively, they handle approximately 10 billion calls a day. They can collect, store, and process the resulting data in a way that protects the privacy of individuals and groups, create indicators such as location, mobility, usage, and demographic information. The operator's distinct understanding of mobile big data puts them in a unique position to analyze it, along with contextual data where relevant, and to produce actionable insight tools and other mobile big data products and services. Third-party data providers are organizations from different industries with complementary data sets. These can be combined with mobile big data to provide context and to enhance the insights. They include satellites and drone companies for geospatial data, social networks and sharing economy firms, national statistics agencies, and public sector agencies for specialist data such as medical and health, education, tourism, utilities, agriculture, transportation, and immigration data, and then the list goes on. Also, retail industry is another such stakeholder. Now taking a look at the role of the government. The government can be involved in 5 primary ways. So as a beneficiary, as a demand-side agency, a third-party data provider, as mentioned, as the regulator, and also as the policymaker. So as a beneficiary, government would benefit from efficiency savings and productivity gains generated by the application of a mobile big data solution. As a demand-side agency, the government uses insights from solutions to plan expenditure, build policy frameworks, and allocate resources across projects. As a third-party data provider, the government provides secondary data through various agencies and public institutions, which can provide relevant context for mobile big data. As the regulator, the government enforces the relevant laws and regulations, including data protection laws, which impact on use and sharing of data across the ecosystem. And finally, as policymaker, the government defines policy that creates an enabling environment that stimulates innovation and the adoption of mobile big data solutions. Without government, solutions of these type could be less likely to have the scale of impact desired in a country. So now that we've summarized the roles and contributions of the stakeholders, it's time to illustrate how through some real world engagements, they've been realized through the work of one of our AI for Impact task force members, Orange. So to do this, I would like to invite Pascal to present on Orange's experiences in the context of COVID-19. By way of introduction, Pascal holds a PhD in telecommunication and master's degrees in both data sciences and computer sciences. He's been highly involved in Orange mobile network design and optimization processes in excess of 15 years, I believe, linked in with research projects. And for the last 6 years, he has been the co-founder and become the principal manager of the Fluvision crowd analytics solution at Orange Business Services. Pascal, let me pause there and hand over to you, and please let me know when you'd like me to progress with the slides.
So from the experience that we had this year, which was a very interesting experience, we think that COVID crisis has marked a turning point into the perceived value of crowd analytics data from operators, and we believe that this value will stay during time, and that we'll be able to develop this kind of activity in the future. And maybe more on a B2G context, so business to government context, that was maybe a smallest part of the development of these solutions that we used to know before. What we saw is that this crisis highlighted significant difficulties on operational knowledge of what is the distribution of the population and its mobility in a context when these elements deviate significantly from the usual and known standards of the population. Basically, when it deviates a lot from the usual national statistics that are available on the territory and country. And what happened is that operator data, it was able to brought local, national, and international indicators at a very early stage of the crisis, and also with almost a real-time update and availability. This capability to answer very quickly to a crisis and to answer completely on all the territory to the crisis was very important in the value perceived and the operational value of the data that was provided. And what we see, why do I say that it was revealed to states? It's because even though the potential was known or suspected by some, for instance, some national statistical institutes, it was the case strongly in Spain before the crisis, and there were also initiatives at the European level before the crisis. The real world usage and operational usage of this data by these institutes were not directly seen and directly applied yet. And with this crisis, we really had to enter into the data and to get on what is possible to be done and what is possible to be proved with this data at a large scale. And sometimes, and it was the case in France, for instance, these national statistic institutes were a little bit reluctant on depending on MNO's data in order to provide some national statistics, and this crisis forced them in order to try to do so and to see that in fact it could be effective, and they may be depending on this data, which also creates some potential tensions, but to that on the second slide of the presentation. We also see that some large institutions like GSMA or the World Bank be forecasted and be foresee the capability of this kind of data. But also what we saw during this crisis is that this capacity has been highlighted in the media, and a lot of the visibility and the activity there was around the data was, of course, to try to help solving the crisis. But it was a lot triggered by the media and the emphasis that the media puts on this kind of data and insights that were provided. So in France, we can mention several operational use of this data that were done. We had a lot of work with the National Statistic Institute that supplied local authorities with data on the new spread of population during lockdown. And you can see on the bottom right corner of the slide a map that shows in blue the areas in France where people left, and we see a massive left in the ski resorts and in the big cities for people moving to their second home in inland or near the coast. And it was during the first lockdown in France, it was a huge mobility of population. Just in the Parisian region, it was about 1.5 million of people who moved usual living area to a different living area in France. And so I think at the country level, it was 3 to 4 million people who moved post lockdown. So all the usual national statistics were down, and there was a strong need to know where people are in order to dimension both hospitals, but also logistic, police, and everything that needed to be redimensioned in order to take into account the new population spread in the country. And the second way, the National Statistic Institute, the data, it was more the mobility data and the mobility evolution during the lockdown and during the different phases of unlocking down the country. And it was to try to correlate that with assessing the economic conjuncture and the way the economy starts again after the lockdown. So this was the work we did with INSEE during a period of time. We worked a lot at the beginning with hospitals and health departments in order to use the data to dimension logistic, but also with health departments in order to target areas for testing population when the tests were made available in France. And we had a long collaboration with INSERM on other countries in Africa, and we reworked with them in France and in other countries during this period of time, more on epidemiologic analysis of the crisis. And it's also work that has been done with the European Union Joint Research Center during the period of lockdown in Europe. And you can see still on the right side bottom corner of the slide an example of a type of BI that we provided that show the evolution of global mobility in France during the first lockdown and during the second lockdown. And this is quite interesting because it shows it's very correlated with what was expected in terms of results of the measures of the lockdown. For instance, we see during the second lockdown that the mobility stayed the same, almost the same than usual during work at the beginning of work hours, and people have to travel to bring their kids to school, because schools were still open during second lockdown, and people were less incentivized to do teleworking. And that during weekends, for instance, the decrease of mobility is huge, and especially long mobility over 50 kilometers, it decreased by a factor 10 during the weekend. So this kind of data, it allows really to see what are the results of the lockdown policy and to measure the impact of, if the crisis starts again, what is effective and what is not effective. Thanks to this solution that we put in place during the past 6 years, we were able to answer in a very short time frame, like several days in France, Belgium, and Spain. But we were also able to deploy the solution in a matter of weeks in other countries where we had a strong demand. And it was the case in Romania, in Slovakia, in Morocco, in Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and as we will see later with Abdul, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So from my experience, the crowd analytics response to this crisis was outstanding and mostly on a pro bono basis. And I saw also an incredible dedication and energy put together by the technical teams to support the international efforts to fight the pandemic. And all of this is very positive. It had very positive outcomes, and there are a lot of very efficient and well-managed initiatives that reach their goal and operational results. And it's also what we will talk about the RDC in the second part of this webinar. But when I was asked by Robert to talk about ecosystem in this session, and maybe probably because I'm French, I wanted to share a vision maybe less organized and polished than what Robert presented before on what we experience in terms of ecosystem and relationship between the different actors, especially with the background we have with the first lockdown, a period of time where things seem to go back to normal again, and then a second lockdown. So Robert, if you can switch to the second slide. So what I wanted to present here is a more detailed view on the ecosystem and actors that we've seen. And I wanted to emphasis also on two actors that were not fully mentioned in the different actors. It's the medias that really played a very big role in France, and I know it's in some of the countries. And also the GAFAM that played a little role surprisingly in providing data in this crisis. And I will try to discuss a little bit why this. And so I put the three main organizations that enter into the ecosystem of the crisis. First, the state organization, generally led by a crisis core team, and under this you had all the ministers, and especially health, interior, and industry that were concerned by the data that we could provide. And the public institutions, especially the National Statistic Institution and the National Research Center or health research centers that were involved in the crisis. On the top of the slide, you can see the international organizations that we saw involved and that entered in our ecosystem during this crisis. With the European Union, who asked all the operators in Europe to provide data in order to be able to follow epidemiology and to try to understand the crisis at a European level, because it's not a country issue, it's also an international issue with a lot of mobility between the different countries, and epidemic spread that depends also on what happens in other countries. And for this, we worked with the Joint Research Center at European Union. We also had still have contacts with some organizations at the United Nations, especially the World Bank, and also with NGOs and different foundations that were involved in requesting some data, in helping with data, and then you have the MNO part that you well know. With that, I also mentioned the legal obligations that we usually have with states, because we see, at least in France, that some of the learnings of this crisis is that providing data may lead to new legal obligations that we would have in the future. And the crowd analytics services that used to be a very small, I would say tiny part of the activity of an operator, and which remains a very small part when you look at revenue generated by this kind of activity, but that took a very high part in the communication of MNOs, of the data provided during the crisis. And I think one of the difficulties that we also have in this ecosystem is the gap between the communication that was made and the use that was made of the data provided by MNOs during the crisis and the reality of the size and the revenues generated by this activity on a day-by-day basis for the past years for operators. So I wanted to put some problematic elements that we had with this organization. So Robert, if you can advance on the elements, and you can put the three first ones together. We see that in terms of demand, and go back on what Robert presented, we saw operational needs coming from the ministries and from the crisis core team, and the legitimate people to answer were the public institutions to answer to these operational needs. We also see that this was not very well organized. There were many priorities to manage at the same time, so there was a lack of communication between all these institutions and different parties at the state organization. But what triggered really the use of the data and the emergency using the data was the media. And it was a communication race on because people saw that there was a lot of movement in the country, and people wanted to know how much, where, and what was going on. And it's really the media that triggered the use of the data by the government and by the crisis core team. The fact that it was triggered by the media, it's on one side it put a unique spotlight on the data and on this activity, but it raised a lot of questions and a lot of polemics. The question is, who is legitimate to communicate about this data? And what we think is that it's public institution that is legitimate. And a lot of polemic on the facts of the number themselves. For instance, the fact that a lot of Parisian people left in the countryside. It was a big polemic because it was said to take the hospital places of the local people and take the food of the local people. So it was a polemic, and operators don't really want to be taken in this kind of polemics, and of course polemic on the privacy and how we manage to provide this kind of data. Robert, if you can show the next 2 or 3 elements. So at the MNO side, first there was an importance of answering, because some MNOs are former state companies, and they are very linked with the governments. We also have legal obligations that provides links with the governments. It was also a guarantee of sovereignty on data, and this was linked with a very low-key answer by the GAFA during crisis. But MNOs are also target on privacy and favorite targets of media and public on polemics and privacy. So the communication is quite difficult for MNOs on this, especially on a subject that is not strategic in terms of on revenue, but more a question of image and value dissemination for MNOs. So this was a difficulty that we had. And all of this was done, and it's the next two bubbles, was done in a context of legislation. Robert, if you can show the next 2 bubbles. Oh, so sorry, it was not this one. So the context of the international organization was not present in France, but more in the other countries where we had activity. And the question was, what is the visibility of, for instance, the Joint Research Center towards state organization? And what we see right now is that these international things an initiative didn't have visibility in the country themselves. If we look at some institutions like the World Bank, it's the acceptability of the help that is given by the World Bank, by the states. So here we enter more general relationships that we see between international organizations and states. And in terms of NGOs and foundations, the difficulties that we saw is that there was a lot of will to help and to try to put things into place, but the efficiency of all the different initiatives and all the demands that we got, where sometimes it was more spreading out the capability and the energy that we had in order to answer the questions, than really being focused on trying to solve a very concrete problem. Even as we will talk about later, it was not the case in RDC, for instance. And all of this, and it's the last bubbles, was done in national and international legislation framework that is changing. And for instance, in Europe, we have iPrivacy coming that will manage the data from operators, and that seems to be very restrictive. And it was difficult to navigate between the constraints, the fact that we had to answer to the crisis, and the things that will come in the future and may block the kind of initiatives that we have to answer the crisis. So I think I've been too long, so I will stop here. But this was a view of different challenges and elements that we saw in the ecosystem, despite the real quality and the real operational efficiency of that was done in many countries by operators and all these actors. And of course, one of the main trigger of the difficulties on the long term is the fact that we will have to move from a pro bono perspective on all this data to an ecosystem that work with financing all these activities. That's all for me, Robert.
Excellent. Thank you, Pascal. Great to see both the range of work that Orange are doing in response to COVID, but also as well, thank you for providing the alternate to the ideal world view that I presented earlier in terms of experiences and how engaging across the ecosystem can be challenging for all parties involved due to different expectations that are put upon parties in that context. At this point, I'd like to bring in Abdoul Karim Diora. Abdul, just to check that you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic.
Hi,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you so much, Abdul, for joining us. So if you'll allow me, Abdul, let me a quick introduction for yourself. For our audience benefit, Abdul is the Senior Manager of the Wholesale and Multi-Service Projects in Orange in the DRC, and is mainly focused on managing the interconnection with national and international operators and driving their multi-service strategy. On behalf of Orange DRC, Abdul has had a strong contribution into making the fight against COVID using mobile data a reality. So Abdul, thank you very much for joining us. Perhaps we could begin with you explaining for the benefit of the audience why mobile big data is important and relevant in DRC.
Right, thank you very much, Robert. So actually, I would like to talk about the COVID-19 first and what we have here in DRC. The official numbers are saying we have around 12,000 people with around 300 deaths since the beginning of the crisis. So COVID-19 is having a huge impact on public health, DRC, like everywhere in the world, and the economy in general is being affected. Yeah. So in DRC, why mobile big data is important? It's first because we have a lack of data statistic in general, which makes very hard for local authorities to take appropriate decisions. So we have this issue in our countries, in our African countries, and We also have the fact that data may help in having an idea on what's going on very fast for the authorities. So this make mobile data extremely useful. For example, in knowing, for example, what we have done in DRC, the mobile data has been helpful to know what was the impact of the lockdown, for example, on the economy, and if the lockdown itself has reached the objectives of reducing people mobility and disease progression generally in DRC.
Excellent, thank you. And so I'm aware that Orange is actively contributing. So perhaps can you explain to us a little bit about the COVID-19 response by the government and how Orange and DRC are actually contributing to that?
Right, so the government in DRC has had a strong response to COVID-19 by putting in place a task force which is reporting directly to the president. So next to this task force, many organizations such as PAF, ANISIS, the MNOs, try to contribute to the fight also with building a control room hosted by Kinshasa Digital and under the technical supervision of the GSMA. Yeah. So this control room has built a very useful dashboard, including use cases on mobility, hospital capacity, economic analysis based on mobile average revenue per user. And this dashboard has been published and given to the task force so that they have a tool, a very useful tool to measure the impact of the decisions that they take, and also predict what will be the impact of their future decisions. For the MNOs, for example, contribution, Orange has provided anonymized data to feed the control room, and also has supported Kinshasa Digital with the tool Flux Vision, which has been presented by Pascal. So Orange has provided this data to the control room, and this data has been used to build the dashboard actually.
Fantastic, thank you. So as I say, it sounds like you've made an awful lot of progress in a relatively short space of time. But it's also, I think, fair to say that mobile big data analytics is still relatively in its infancy in DRC itself. And of course, I'm aware that the activity that you're doing is still ongoing. But in terms of progress that's been made to date, or key enablers perhaps that have emerged, that have contributed to accelerate authorities' readiness to use mobile big data solutions for decision making. So what do you think are the elements that it sounds like there's positive engagement on both sides, from the supply side and the demand side? But how did you come to being that you were supporting the project? And can you perhaps comment a little bit on the authorities' readiness to use mobile big data solutions in DRC?
Right. So I think the job we have been doing on COVID-19 has have been very useful for the authorities and such projects where use cases are related to real life matters are being examples themselves, or are talking themselves to people. It has also been shown that the solution is replicable to other diseases such as malaria or Ebola. So this has been clear to everybody. By having use cases developed also by Congolese data scientists, we have created a local, or we are creating, it's not done yet, but it's ongoing. We are creating a local expertise and the whole ecosystem that will help in accelerating local authorities' awareness. So it's something that is ongoing. What we have been doing on COVID-19 has been very helpful. It has shown everybody that a mobile big data solution can be really useful. But this ecosystem has to be built, and we have made a step into it, but we still have some more. We still have a couple of more things to do to make it a reality in DRC.
Question for myself in the context of the work you're doing in DRC. So if you were to offer advice to others listening who are interested in perhaps developing capabilities for similar applications in their own countries, what advice would you give out based on your experiences here and then perhaps prior to this?
All right. So the first advice I would like to give is the fact that it's only possible if MNOs are willing to provide anonymized data to data scientists who can actually build use cases based on those data. So the data itself is like the first element. So I would like to encourage our colleagues, our MNOs to contribute to support such projects, especially in Africa, where having data to help in decision or evaluate decisions that have been taken is a real challenge. Sustainability is important also. Such projects can remain only if there is an effort to support data scientists, MNOs, and the other stakeholders that are doing effort on to build the data, to provide first, to build it, and to build the use cases. So the two things I would like to advise is to support by providing the data itself when it comes to MNO, and to all the stakeholders to substantially support, financial support such projects.
Great, thank you, Abdul. So it sounds like a willingness to engage on the side of the operators and the question of sustainability of services as well in terms of funding in the long term to keep services running. Thank you so much. I'm keen to bring Pascal back in, and so I suggest we move to the audience Q&A, given that we have a number of questions submitted there. You still have time to submit questions, so please use the button on the right-hand side to do so, but I'll begin working through some of those here. Perhaps I'll start with you, Pascal. So one of the first questions I have here, so trying to work with everyone in the ecosystem looks both complex and time-consuming. So how do you identify the right organizations to work with in your experience?
So first, I confirm complex and time-consuming, energy-consuming. At the very beginning, it was difficult to identify the right organizations to work with. So we did two things in parallel. First one was to try to standardize the solution and the kind of indicators and statistics that we provide in order to fit the main needs that we got from all the different actors in the crisis, in order to be able to provide a standardized data set that we can feed many different actors with, that we can document, and that will decrease the quantity of work that we will have to do in order to support the usage by all different actors. And so we try to do that at national level, and we try to do that at international level, so that we can come in a country with the set of indicators that we know are useful for this kind of crisis, and so that decrease the quantity of support that we have to do on the data. And the second point is it takes time and perspective on things, and you see what kind of factors are comfortable with the data, what kind of factors are legitimate in their communication and in their the way that they document the governments and the different authorities in order to make decisions. And then you try to focus your work with this kind of organizations and less with the other ones who are more in a process of being curious about the data. But it takes time and knowledge, and we didn't have this knowledge at the beginning of the crisis. We have it now. For instance, for the second lockdown, we work closely with less organizations than we did during the first lockdown in France.
Great, thank you. The next question, Abdul, I'll direct that to yourself, but of course, Pascal, if you want to add anything as well from your experience, please do. So the question here, did you have any issues with building confidence in the representativeness or robustness of the data and insights with the organizations that you're engaging with in the DRC? And if so, how were you able to address that?
Actually, in DRC, the regulation is not saying a lot about it, okay? About the data, how we should work on it, how we should anonymize it. So the main issue we had was to build a strong partnership and a confidence with all the stakeholders that will access to those data, and we made sure that data were first anonymized and aggregated before putting them into the control room, so that there was no other way to get back to the subscriber itself or identify the subscriber. So this is something that we have been doing with Flux Vision, which is a strong tool that is used for such aggregation. And one other thing we have done is to sign a contract with Kinshasa Digital, where the data scientists are, in order to provide the information only to the stakeholders and the task force itself. So it has to be a trustful environment, and you have to have a trustful partnership with the stakeholders involved into the project.
And if I can take the question on a different angle, Abdul answered very well on the angle of privacy and confidence we have the fact that we cannot go back to a single user and privacy is fully preserved. If the question is more on the confidence of the statistics themselves compared to reality, it's difficult, and it's especially difficult in this crisis situation, as the results have to show something that we don't have data to compare with. So usually we take confidence in our model by comparing with some surveys or with other data that exist and that are stable and well known. In the case of a crisis, it's more difficult to do so. So it's based on experience. It's based on the confidence that we built in for several years of usage of the data, and in countries where you can work with some national statistic agencies, it's a confidence that you build with them, and you compare the way you extrapolate your own data to the global population with the way they understand also this kind of extrapolation. And it's a joint work with this kind of agencies in order to build the confidence on what we're able to do. And of course, one of the keys to be able to have other type of data that we can compare with.
Excellent. Thank you both there. I'm going to ask if we can be brief with the answers, just because I'm conscious that we're running over on time a little bit, although we did start a couple of minutes late. So Pascal, perhaps another question for yourself. You mentioned around, or we've had a discussion a little bit about sustainability of services. Do you have any examples that you can perhaps share where Orange has moved from a pro bono model into more of a commercial or perhaps philanthropic funded business model? And do you have any key lessons or lessons learned or insights from those?
I have more examples where we were not able to, but yeah, I have some examples where we've been able to. For instance, with some research centers, that we provided with pro bono data during the crisis. They also wanted to do more in-depth analysis and research analysis to make models and understand better what the dynamic of the crisis and after the crisis and before the crisis. And we entered a specific model where we made a commercial offer that is at a low price, but that can only be used for research purposes, and where data cannot be published directly. Only the results of a research can be published. So we had some models like that we worked on, and we also work with the state in order to have a public order of data that would be used continuously by the state. We also have some examples where it didn't work to go on that, and one thing I wanted to share is that, especially when because it was very mediatic, the type of data that were diffused, you can have backfire on not providing pro bono data anymore, with some actors saying that they would like to communicate also during the second lockdown, but unfortunately we don't get the data for free anymore. So it's kind of tricky, and sometimes it could put you in a difficult situation in terms of communication.
Okay, fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm going to call a conclusion to the audience Q&A there. We will follow up with any other questions once the session is published online. The last couple of things for me to do. If you want to find out more about the ecosystem topics that we've covered here today, but also the other elements that we've covered in the webinar series to date, those are available on the AI for Impact Toolkit. That's on the gsma.com website. The address is on the page in front of you. And finally then, for the AI for Impact webinar series, over the coming months, we'll be continuing with the in-country engagements, and we'll also continue to publish blogs and webinars on the topic of using mobile big data analytics to combat challenges, including COVID-19. The next of those will be a review of our activity from 2020, which is planned to be released in January 2021. So if you'd like to register your interest in attending the next session, you can email industrypurposeevents@gsma.com, or you can visit the gsma.com Better Future AI for Impact page for both past and the future blogs and webinars. To wrap up today's session then, I would like to thank our presenters and panelists. So Pascal Chambreuil from Orange Business Services and Abdoul Karim Diawara from Orange DRC. Thank you both for taking the time to join us and share your knowledge and experience with us. Very insightful. As a reminder, this initiative has been funded by UK aid from the UK government and is supported by the GSMA and its members. And that the views expressed within do not necessarily reflect the UK government's official policies. And finally, from myself, Rob Childs, thank you very much to our audience for joining us. Hope you found this a informative and engaging session, and would like to wish you all a very good day. Thank you. Goodbye.